Good afternoon, everybody. If you're on the East Coast, it is straight up 1 o'clock. I'm Lori Stevens with Laws Communications, and really happy to have you all here for class number 4 of 10 master classes that we're doing this week. I want to introduce our speaker in just a second, but before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about our very generous sponsor, Scope Now. Scope Now is our sponsor for the SMILE conference. Scope Now works with top law enforcement and SIU intelligence personnel across the globe, helping them aggregate, centralize, and automate investigations. I really highly recommend you all check out Scope Now. And of course, they'll have a big presence at the SMILE conference if you're planning on attending that. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Constable Rob Carver has been with the Winnipeg Police Service for over 25 years. He has experience in general patrol, financial crimes, intelligence, domestic violence, child abuse. Before joining the police, he was a bond trader and investment analyst. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Lori. How are you?
So, Rob, before you begin, I just want to also remind people to please ask questions. This particular webinar is going to be, I think, a little bit more of a conversation than a lot of our classes have been. So please ask questions. Please be involved in this webinar as much as you can. And also, we are not that big a group that I can unmute anybody who wants to ask a question verbally. So Rob, with that, take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Again, I'm Rob Carver. I'm a constable with the Winnipeg Police Service. I'm in my 28th year. I've been the public information officer for about 4.5 full-time, and I had done some fill-in before that. So a fair amount of experience in front of a camera. What I'm going to talk about today is something that happened back in June of this year, and it concerns an arrest that happened the early morning, about 7:45 on June 11th. We had multiple 911 calls of a male with a gun in a downtown district of Winnipeg, and we had a number of units respond to that. The totality of the incident lasted about 3 minutes, and really not much on our radar. We'd heard about it. It was, to put some background, it was in the midst of the start of the pandemic. No masks being worn at that point. It was also at the time of really the Defund the Police, Black Lives Matter movement that had started to move across first the US and then Canada. This wasn't really much on our radar, this incident, until sort of mid-afternoon of June 11th, when we got reports that there was a video floating around. It was a fairly grainy video, and unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it. The video was posted to a public Facebook page of an individual in Winnipeg, and there were some pretty negative comments about our use of force in arresting this individual. No shots were fired, and I will show you a secondary video so everyone will get a sense as to what happened. The grainy video that was initially posted appears to show an officer kicking the individual, and the video makes it look like the kicks may have been delivered to the male's head. That's not what happened, but we got a lot of, there were a fair amount of negative comments floating around within the community about officers kicking this individual while he's on the ground. Didn't appear to have a weapon. We responded to that, and I'll talk about our response specifically to that Facebook post at the end of my presentation. What happened next, though, was a secondary video came to light, very high quality, very high def, and it shows the entirety of the incident. That video is from a surveillance cameras, security cameras from buildings in the area. And what we did next, once we got that video, was a movement started within my office, the media office, to take the secondary video, very high quality, and show it the next day. And what I have on my screen and what I will show you shortly after. So on June 12th, we put that video up, and the video I'm going to show not only is that, but my colleague Jay Murray's press conference going through that video in detail. the decision to play that video and to sort of comment on it frame by frame in terms of a use of force analysis was something we didn't take lightly. We'd never really done anything like that before. Winnipeg Police Service does not have body cams or dash cams. So we often don't have this sort of tool at our disposal, so to speak, a video of an arrest. We decided we had to do this to counter the first video. We wanted to be as transparent as possible, as immediate as possible. And I want to give, at this point, just some credit to two individuals. One is Winnipeg Police Service Chief Danny Smythe, who has been really instrumental in my office being able to provide that sort of commentary on law enforcement related events, to get out there quick, and to be as transparent as we can. And the other individual is our manager of public affairs, Kelly Den, who I have been working for during my time in this office, and he really has pushed that as well. Kelly has a background; he was a journalist in the city, crime beat, as well as running the news show, and he brings that kind of experience in terms of what the media would want to this office. I think what I'm going to do now is I'll just give you a bit of more context. We decided that we would put a public information officer up in front of the camera and go through this video. On screen is my colleague Jay Murray, obviously a little younger than I am, but lots of experience as well. So there are two of us at that point in the office, really as PIOs, public information officers. We also did something else that morning, and not only did we decide that really with the chief's push that we would be as transparent and as immediate as we could be, we also made a decision that it was so important to get this video out that we realized doing it could risk the prosecution of the individual. It could risk the court case. As an organization, we decided that that's a risk we were prepared to take, and we actually brought in the officers who were in the incident, who were in the video, and we asked them all of what they thought about that, if they were on site, and the view was unanimous that they would rather have their actions explained to the city and risk this case, and we don't know the outcome of the case yet, than to just let the rumors fly. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing the video, which is really our Facebook live stream of our press conference on June 11th.
Today we're going to talk about an incident that occurred yesterday morning. The video, there's a video that was shared on social media very widely. Admittedly, it's a tough video to watch. It involves the use of force by our officers, and that video shows the arrest of this individual. So for the first thing, I'm going to just recount, or I'm just going to go over again the incident for those that aren't aware. On June 11, 2020, at 7:45 a.m., WPS responded to the report of a man with a gun behind the concert hall. The male appeared to be on methamphetamine and fractured a large granite slab valued at approximately $10,000. He then used a brick to smash a window in the concert hall valued at approximately $7,000 and broke into the building. He was confronted by security and left. He then brandished a handgun, terrifying pedestrians, and resulted in multiple calls to 911. Bystanders pointed out the male to responding officers who confronted the male. He discarded the handgun but refused to comply with officers' demands to get on the ground. He assaulted one of the officers but was forced to the ground. Officers struggled in their attempts to place the male into handcuffs. While struggling with the officers, a knife and a heavy bar were located on the male. The male was taken into custody without any injuries, and officers recovered the handgun at the scene. Flynn Nolan Dorian, a 33-year-old male of Winnipeg, has been charged with possession of a weapon ×3, assault a peace officer, resist a peace officer, mischief over 5,000 ×2, break and enter, fail to comply with probation order, and that's for having a weapon contrary to his order. And he also had an outstanding arrest warrant for an assault charge, and he was detained in custody. Spelling of that name is...
I'm just going to halt Jay there. I'm going to not play this video in its entirety. I'm sure everybody can see it. 41 minutes and 40 seconds, which is far too long. I will jump through to various parts that I think are critical. I'm just wondering, I'm assuming this is interactive. Are there any questions that anybody would have in terms of the background context to this?
We don't have any so far, Rob.
Okay, all right.
Again, feel free to raise your hand, folks, if you want to just jump in on this. We have a kind of a small group, so anybody can speak if you'd like.
Okay, I'm just going to move to, Jay talks about an interesting bit of feedback we got, and I'll move to that just briefly. We're always amazed, and I'm sure anybody in this end of law enforcement realizes that the people who have the megaphone right now are really a small percentage of the population, and we find we still have an awful lot of supporters in the community. One of those supporters had reached out to our office and made this comment. I'll just
Before we get going here, I just want to read a comment that we found on social media this morning, and I think it provides important context and maybe perspective from an angle that we don't always appreciate when we talk about these incidences. This comment comes from the husband of a woman who was involved in this incident, and I'm just going to read his comment. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the WPS for keeping our city safe and the people safe, and in this particular incident, my wife safe. She witnessed the whole event from beginning to end. The male had gone around vandalizing and threatening people in her neighborhood. This included my wife as she was walking to her car on her way to work. This man crossed paths with her, and he even threw something at her. Someone else must have called police, because seconds later the police showed up and asked him to get on the ground, and he refused. He was high on meth, reported having a gun and knife. My wife witnessed it all, and she saw him refuse to cooperate and was not following orders. When she saw how this video surfaced up with people hating on the police, she was in tears. People have taken a 15-second video clip of an event and are creating a narrative that lines up with a hot topic to get, and this is the words of this individual, few ego boost, but refusing to listen to the actual story. Everyone is feeling sorry for this individual, but no one is feeling sorry for the people, including the wife, that were in danger. This individual had a knife and a gun, was high on meth and a danger to the neighborhood, threatening innocent citizens. And then the person again thanks the WPS.
I think that person's comment and Jay's reading it highlights what we wanted to do from a media office standpoint that morning, which is to make sure that we were being balanced. There's some negative stuff, and we viewed it as our duty to explain the actions of our officers, and partly for those officers, because this is a textbook case of an arrest that went perfect. No shots were fired. We had an individual who was reported to be armed with a handgun, and minimal force is used. Everybody walked away. We actually brought in our use of force team, our trainers, the morning of this, and they prepped Jay and I. I will tell you that Jay is a certified use of force instructor, as am I. And we do that in our role as PIOs to make sure that we are able to accurately comment in situations like this. I'm going to fast forward this and get to the point where Jay introduces the video.
Hey, Rob, before you do that,
yep.
We do have one question.
Sure.
And just because you're talking about Jay making these comments, the question is from Josh, and he's saying, can you tell us about the conversation to have your PIO do this versus your chief?
Interesting. So I will tell you, this is sort of known in Winnipeg, but it was supposed to be me doing this press conference. And I had a fairly heated exchange with a not very friendly reporter the day before, which turned out to be recorded. And a decision was made, it was not going to be me. And then the decision, of course, came down to, and I know there was a lot of back and forth that morning as to whether it would be Chief Smythe or Jay Murray. But they chose Jay, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is because Jay is a certified use of force trainer. Two, we wanted to talk about this at a fairly basic level. Really, the reality is we felt a blue shirt would come across better than a white shirt. It came across, we felt that Jay could connect better in terms of explaining what was happening and having a resonance with people he was talking to. I think it worked for us. I'm curious if anybody has any comments about that, but I know that that was a back and forth quite a bit that morning between the chief, other members of our executive management team, and ultimately our office. Hope that answers that question.
I think it answers it beautifully, and I don't have anybody wanting to comment. If anybody wants to, please hit the raise hand button. But excuse me, I totally agree. I mean, if you put the chief up there, it's just going to look like, he's just covering for his guys, right?
Yep, exactly. I will. We'll start at the video here.
Police. He comes into frame. He spikes the handgun, or what was believed to be a handgun at the time, into the ground and continues to walk away from officers. It's at that point that he refuses to comply with police direction to get down, and he again continues to walk away. Here's the video, so it'll just be 2 minutes. So you see the individual on the right side.
So the individual in the white jacket on the right side is the person with the gun. I'm just going to back it up there for 1 second. You'll see he knows officers are coming and he takes the gun. We're not sure if he only has one, but throws it onto the ground.
So we'll watch the video a few times. So you see the individual on the right side. He spiked what's believed to be the handgun. You see a woman walking away on the top of the screen. Officers give chase to the male, try to get him on the ground. He refuses to comply. And now the struggle begins as they try to take him into custody. And again, we'll go over this video a few times.
Those are the kicks that in the first video looked like they were kicks to the head.
The male's taken in custody at that point. We'll play the video out again after, but I'm just going to go back to the beginning of the video and explain some context.
Just going to stop this for a minute. Are there any questions at this point?
None. Keep
None?
going.
Okay.
So at this point, the individual has spiked the gun already. I'm just going to go back and show that again. He comes into frame, throws the handgun on the ground, looks over his shoulder at the cruiser car. These officers are now attempting to get him to comply with their direction, but he's refusing to and continues to walk away. Officers give chase and attempt to take him into custody. The struggle involves a number of officers that attempt to safely restrain him, but were unsuccessful. Officers initially begin using what we call soft empty hand control and transition to hard empty hand control when it's proved to be ineffective. And just for information, hard empty hand control is physical control that has a higher likelihood of injuring a person but not intended to cause grievous bodily harm or death. And this includes striking techniques, which are seen on the video. So at this point, it's important to note that the officer on the left has his hands on the carbine rifle. So he's only got access to he only can use his legs. So soon after, a knife is observed at the individual's waistband. And at this point, you can see he delivers 2 kicks to the individual's shoulder. At the same time, the taser is deployed and the knife is dislodged. So it's very hard to see, especially I think for those that are watching on social media. Again, we'll provide this video. But if you look at the individual's waistband, you can see a knife get dislodged. And it goes up against the curb. So at this point, we're beginning to use less force. That knife has been removed. The individual initially provides his hands, but then again tucks it under his body. And at this point, the taser is used again, and eventually compliance is gained, and officers then get off the individual, and he's moved into a safe position. Later on, a metal pipe that was wrapped in a coil was also found on him. And it's again important to note that the information that we had received that we were acting on indicated not that he just had a firearm, that he had a large metal object on him as well. At one point it was described as a screwdriver. Other witnesses described it as being something larger in metal. So the firearm is not the only thing that we're looking for on this individual or believe that he can be armed with. And again, this is incredibly tough for some people to watch. The vast majority of use of force encounters or encounters that the WPS have with individuals are resolved without the need for force. I believe last year only 4 incidences out of every 1,000 involved the use of force. And I think that's a statistic that we're pretty proud of. That number can still come down, and the average every year that number continues to drop, and it's something we continue to work at. And our work will never be done until that number becomes 0. We share that goal with other groups. We don't want to use force, we never do, but it's a necessity, it's a requirement of the job at times.
I'm just going to pause this for a second. I think for anybody watching, you can see that Jay is very comfortable talking about use of force. And I would recommend any agency that is looking at doing something like this, make sure that your PIO or your spokesperson is well trained. Jay does training on a regular basis. I have as well, at a level above our other officers. Again, both certified as instructors, to be able to do this with some credibility and some authority. And it worked very well. As you can see, Jay here talks, he is an authority on this.
So once compliance is gained, officers give him space and ensure he's in a safe position. There's no further need for force. And once he's in the recovery position, we do this to alleviate the risk of positional asphyxia and ensure that if he vomits, there's no blockage. An ambulance is contacted, and the male is checked out and cleared by medical professionals. So this male actually admitted to using a significant, and I need to emphasize, a significant amount of methamphetamine the evening before. And that was self-disclosed by the individual. And that certainly contributes to complications when we're dealing with an individual. It's been described that this individual was in some sort of psychosis. The individual did not respond to what we call tactical communication or verbal direction. You can see from that video, we're trying to get his arms, we can't. Knee strikes are ineffective. And I mean, you need to point out too that most of these officers are larger than this individual and working in tandem, and they still can't get this person's hand out.
I'm going to stop it at this point. I will move forward to the part of the press conference where reporters weigh in and there's a Q&A. I think it's really insightful to see how Jay counters some of the questions, which are really reflective, I think, of what the public was asking as well at the time. Again, I want to point out that this was in an atmosphere, which we still all are in, of an anti-police kind of sentiment, Black Lives Matter. The individual that was arrested was Indigenous, and that is certainly a huge factor for us in Winnipeg. We have one of the largest urban populations of First Nations in the country, and it is really probably a more significant factor for policing here than say interactions with Black individuals.
Hey,
I'm going to move.
You want to take a question?
Absolutely.
From a fellow Canadian cop. I'm unmuting Lori.
Hello, Lori.
Lori, unmute yourself, please, ma'am. There she is.
My apologies. I hit that button by mistake.
Lori sucks at technology. Sorry.
Well, that makes a number of us.
Keep
Hello,
going.
Lori. Are we all?
I don't know what happened to her. Lori, are you there? And she's muted herself, so go ahead and.
Okay, so I'm going to move to the Q&A, and I can be I can be interrupted at any point. I will just
So I'll give priority to those that are here.
The man appears to be unconscious at the end, is he?
I don't believe so.
So that question, in case anybody didn't hear it, was the man appears to be unconscious at the end. Is he? And Jay says he doesn't believe so, and the individual is not unconscious.
I think that's a lot of energy was expended by not only that individual and the officers. You can actually see some of the officers working to catch their breath, and I think it'd be no different for this individual.
I understand the police chief reached out to a number of Indigenous leaders today. Can you discuss what message the service is trying to convey?
I wasn't privy to that conversation, but I do know that he reached out to, as you said, a number of Indigenous leaders, including the Grand Chief MKO.
What message is the service trying to convey?
I think I'm going to just rephrase that question for you. Why did we release this video today? I think that's probably a more appropriate question. It's no secret that there's been a lot of scrutiny on police across North America in the last few days, especially weeks. Anytime there's a video like this that's shared widely, obviously some inaccurate information comes out, some misinformation, and I think the public asks a lot of questions that they want answered. So this is an opportunity to provide those answers. We have done this in the past. There was an incident just off.
I think that's probably one of the best explanations as to why we did this. I couldn't say it any better than Jay did. I can tell you that this exercise, this press conference really resonated very much, not only with the community, but our own officers. And I was speaking to Lori earlier today, and Jay and I got incredibly positive feedback for doing this. Officers felt it was a huge show of support, and we got more comments on this particular news conference than almost any other one we had done. I think it was like 1,000 or something, huge number, thousands. And almost all of them supportive. Not only supportive of what they saw, which was now explained to them, but for us taking the step of doing this and going through this video in detail. Jay makes a comment, and I'm going to fast forward to this. We felt that Jay makes a statements at 25.
Hi, Jeff Keel, CTV Constable. I know you've touched on it, but I'm going to ask a question that maybe a little more directly. Why, in your opinion, is the kick to the suspect justified in this video?
And I'm going to answer bluntly, that kick likely saved his life. If that individual...
That statement became the piece of news that day. That kick likely saved his life. For a lot of people, it really explained exactly what was going on and why force was used, and the force that was used, how we felt it was justified. As an officer, as a career officer, I can tell you that's how I would look at it, is that level of force prevented us from needing to escalate. I mean, we got 4 officers out with weapons, carbines are out. The individual does get tased twice. I'm not sure if that's clear in the video, in attempt to get him to comply and stop turtling. We did get some negative feedback for that. And I'm not sure if every agency has this, but we see a huge difference between Facebook commenters and Twitter commenters. So Facebook seems by and large to be supportive of the Winnipeg Police Service, and our critics, trolls, are on Twitter. Jay was vilified on Twitter for saying, mockingly saying, you know, how could anyone say that kick saved his life? But I think for people in law enforcement and for people who watch that video in detail, that's the conclusion you can draw. And I think Jay really not only hit the nail on the head in describing it, but that short little comment really ended up defining that event for the public. So really, really critical. I'm going to move it forward. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, we do have one. It's a little bit of a long one, and
Sure.
and then Lori is back as well. But Lori, hang on.
Sure.
This one, it says, I don't know how much you may have seen or followed the George Floyd incident. I think everybody has seen and followed the George Floyd incident in the US that took place in May of 2020. The only video that was shown up until a few weeks ago now was recorded by witnesses in the area, a very small snippet of a much larger event. I'm curious to know, and it may be explained, how the outcome of this press conference changed the public perception of the incident with the public perception and trust within the community. I think you've talked about that a little bit, but and anyway, this person goes on to say also, how long after the initial event took place did you do the press conference where you showed the video?
Okay, I'll answer the easy one first, which is the time frame. The incident happened at 7:45 in the morning, 7:45 a.m. on June 11th. This press conference was 11 a.m. June 12th. So the following morning was when we did this press conference.
And that's remarkable.
We did not get the video that Jay shows until 8 p.m. on the night of the incident. Officers were canvassing the area, looking to see if anybody had security video. They found it. They were able to get it, to seize that video and bring it in. I was called at about 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. That video was left for me, came in early the next morning. I made a copy for the media office. I can tell you that my orders were to bring it to the chief's office as soon as I could. They wanted to view it. We're really lucky. And you know, I'm not going to talk about any specific incident in the States or not just in the US, but any other agency's incident. No shots were fired. Nobody was killed here. And that gave us the luxury, the latitude of being able to go into this in detail and not have to worry about broader implications. If we had had an officer-involved shooting, if somebody had been killed here, we could not do this. And I'm sure everybody who is able to attend a conference like this gets that. It goes without saying. So we lucked out in a couple of points here, and we used them to our advantage. One, it was a non-lethal incident. And two, we happen to have some of the best video we've ever seen. You can see the way the two camera angles blend perfectly following the entirety of this individual's arrest. And it happened to be one, and we all know this isn't always the case, where our officers did everything according to their training, everything. Use of force guys were just so impressed, our trainers, when they looked at this. They're going to use this video to train recruits, not Jay's, but the actual arrest itself. So again, you know, if this was an officer-involved shooting or a fatality, there's no way that we would be allowed to go through any of it to the public. So we lucked out. I hope that answers that question.
I think so, Rob. We have two people waiting to speak to you. So
Sure.
We're going to try Lori again. And Lori, if you would unmute yourself, you can go ahead and fire away.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can very well.
Okay, excellent presentation. Thank you for this. Question for you, because I think this is a kind of a police mentality that we like to keep all of our information to ourselves. And you guys were very transparent in this case, which I think is fantastic. Did you find that that benefited the service and this case, that you were very transparent with everything that occurred?
Without question, and it did it on a number of fronts. First of all, well, as I was talking before we went live, in Canada, like the US, there's a broad spectrum of media outlets, from very conservative to very liberal. The largest outlet here is CBC, and they're pretty liberal, and they're not really pro-police. We certainly are cautious when we deal with them. The evening anchor, probably one of the most powerful anchors in the country, is for CBC is Ian Hanaman-Singh. When we did this press conference, he tweeted on his personal account that the Winnipeg Police Service should be commended for doing this, because this is exactly what journalists have been screaming for ages. And he said, he actually countered a couple of negative comments that this is what everyone wanted and we finally did it. So thank you, Winnipeg Police. And I think that was echoed in just so many areas. And we have a number of audiences, and we talk about that all the time in the PIO office here. One is obviously the public. Another is the media. How do we resonate with the media? Although we concern ourselves a lot less with that now than we used to. But the third is our own rank and file officers, and how do they respond? And it almost became embarrassing for Jay and I, for people stopping us. Cops we didn't even know stopping us and saying and emailing us and calling us, thanks for doing that, and stepping up and saying something that everyone wishes they could do, but they can't. So incredibly positive all the way around. And from a social media standpoint, we just saw such a wave of support for this.
And
No.
as you said to me before, oh, I'm sorry, Lori, you're back. Do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Now I had lost my train of thought. No, and Rob, you're exactly right. And I think we say this all the time. And it's the fact that you guys have done this, and being a fellow Canadian, I totally understand where you're coming from. We need to do this more, because if we don't, the public makes their own conclusion, whether that's on social media or otherwise. If we're not giving them the right answers, they'll make up their answers, which is never a good thing for us in policing.
Yeah, you've said it perfectly. And that's been the view of our chief, is if we don't get out there and say it, someone else will say it without our input, and the narrative won't be accurate. So he wanted the most, and I don't know if you're feeling this or everyone else is feeling this, but there are some criticisms now that what we say may not be the truth. And I've never seen that in my career, where I would stand up and somebody would say, well, that's just what they're saying, but how do we know that's true? Those of us in law enforcement, we're looking at narratives, we're looking at police reports, detailed timelines, computer logs, and it's all evidence for court. So the standard is incredibly high, unlike a lot of bits of media. So we wanted to be immediate, which this was as immediate as we could be the next morning. And we wanted to be really transparent. And I think Jay does an excellent job of being asked a whole bunch of tough questions. And I won't bore you. This is on our Facebook page for anyone who wanted to see it in its entirety. I'm not going to bore you with 41 minutes. I'm just going to ask Ali here. I needed that. I couldn't find it.
Rob, we do have, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to pop up on our screen the press release we did, and I wanted to just spend a bit of time as the clock runs down talking about what we chose to do. So this document right here, and I'm not. There we go. I'm hoping that's going to be available to everybody. There we go. So this is a standard press release that anybody in the law enforcement media end would put out. We did that Thursday afternoon, and we wouldn't normally do this. So we're hearing about the incident around noon, 1300, and the first video gets put out. It's the grainy one we don't have that really makes it look like the bald-headed officer carrying the carbine kicks this guy in the head. We actually interview that officer. We get him down in our office, and he explains what happened. And we want to start countering the inaccurate narrative as soon as we can. So I wrote this, and we realized after looking at the Facebook post that had that video that the only really strong way to counter that was to put this as a response on our public Facebook page. That caused a bit of a firestorm in the city. She went from 37 comments initially calling out the police, saying, all of the negative things that they say about use of force by people who don't understand, to almost 200 comments about, okay, maybe you should have just kept quiet and waited till you had all the information. But as we all know, it didn't stop at that. Trolls started hammering this woman quite heavily. Ultimately, really becoming violent or making threats against her, she had to pull her down her Facebook page. And we got some heavy criticism for that. Jay addresses it at the very end, and he addresses it by saying that, you know, this is a risk with public posts on social media, that an inaccurate narrative might have to be corrected, and we did that. I was asked by CBC later to comment on it, and I got misquoted, shocker for anybody who has dealt with the CBC, but what I said was, if I could sit down with a woman and have a coffee, I might apologize. And the headline said, WPS apologizes for what we did. That's not what I said. And the reality is, the first thing, posting this didn't get exactly the response we wanted. We would rethink it, not because of the damage necessarily it did to her, but just from a purely communication standpoint, it wasn't anywhere near as effective as what Jay did. So I'm gonna end with that. We have a couple of minutes left for questions if anyone wants.
Yeah, we have Lynn, if you're hearing me, I think she's unmuted now. Go ahead, Lynn from Bismarck, please.
Hi, I just have a question about this versus a different, we had an incident shortly after the George Floyd incident, and we're relatively close to Minneapolis, so we were feeling the effects. An officer had pulled over a kid on a traffic stop. It was very uneventful. The kid was about 15 years old. He was a black male, and officers talked with him and then let him go. It really was, nothing came of it, but the mother took to social media and blasted the police department for racial profiling and that we were picking on her son, you know, the usual. We brought the mother down, let her watch the in-car video to show her kind of what actually happened. Basically what it was is the vehicle that he was driving had been leaving a high narcotic area several times throughout the night, overnight, and traveling to the neighboring city and coming back. So the officer stopped him for being suspicious. Turns out that they were just moving and they were hauling loads across the river. So we were expecting after the mother met with us that she would go back on social media and kind of start things over again. We're a very transparent agency, so we wanted to get information out as quick as we could and to, you know, basically tell the rest of the story. So we put together a video using the in-car camera, kind of explaining what had actually taken place. In that instance, do you feel like a press conference would have been better, like what you guys did, or because, you know, our chief didn't speak, he just gave the words and I typed them on the video. We never ended up putting it out because she never talked about it again. But in that instance, do you think a live press conference explaining the video would have been more beneficial?
You know, it puts me in a tough spot. I don't know your agency. I'll tell you how we look at it. Jay is very, very, very good at what he does, and I'm pretty competent in front of a camera. And if we're going to do something like that, where it's very sensitive, very nuanced, I can do that in person. I can do that certainly now in COVID through you know, an electronic press conference where I'm doing questions and answers with reporters. I would feel very comfortable doing that interactive. Once you type your words and put them out, you lose control of them. And I don't feel I have the same loss of control when I'm in an interactive press conference. I watched Jay do it. He maneuvered it back quite a number of times to where we want it to be and reinforce our narrative. And I think that's a luxury you get, or a tool you get when you do a press conference.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And going forward, I can see that as being more beneficial than simply putting out words with no way to, I guess, expound on them.
That's the strategy we've been taking, is if it's really something that's going to be complex and have a lot of different sides to it, I would rather be in this sort of format where I'm almost debating, where I'm fielding questions, rather than one shot to write a statement and put it out there.
So we have a couple questions from, I'm sorry, Lynn, Yeah, you've unmuted, or muted, so I think you're all set. We have questions from Jason. First one, do you think that your difference in comments on Facebook versus Twitter, supporters versus trolls, is different based on the user metrics and age of the users on Facebook versus Twitter? Does that make sense?
I just looked over at my assistant who is who falls into that younger age group, and she's nodding, and I'm going to agree with
It's
her.
fine if she wants to answer.
I don't think she does,
Speaking
but
of Ali,
she,
everybody,
but she confirmed that my suspicions. Yes, that is what we believe.
And his follow-up question is, do you think it would be helpful to suggest or consider a change in how you deliver the same accurate information on Facebook as you do on Twitter?
Well, we're always, this is a bit of a black box, right? The press conference I just showed you was something we hadn't tried before, and it worked. And then we base future press conferences on that kind of response. If it hadn't worked, we'd be looking at a different set of tactics. We put out less information, less detailed information, because that's the nature of Twitter. But that also means we have less ability to sort of build this sort of interactive relationship. I don't know. We've actually thrown up our hands. We believe that the way we communicate in terms of our spokespersons, our openness, our transparency, connects with the people we feel we really want to connect with, which is the bulk of citizens in Winnipeg. There's a loud voice, but it's a small voice on Twitter. And we're trying not to respond to that, because it is just, it's a no-win situation. They aren't getting convinced. Actually, Kelly, Den and I are going to be meeting with a professor at the University of Manitoba in the next little while, who's done some research in economics on how to alter arguments with people who are very biased on a particular subject. He's actually looking at economic policy and oil sands and greenhouse gas quotas. And as a follow-up to that, he's done a lot of research in terms of altering people's opinions. We're going to sit down and see if there's some venue, some opportunity to possibly pursue that as a law enforcement agency.
Thank you, Rob. I just want you to know that as I'm sitting here drinking my coffee, people are messaging me on the back end telling me how awesome this presentation is. And you know what? It is, because it's just so remarkable how you handled it. So Jason is saying, thank you, the guy who just asked the questions. Great job. This is such great stuff. And his colleague up in Massachusetts, Derek, says, no question here, just a compliment to your PIO. He did an outstanding job. And so want you folks to know that I know Derek is planning on being at the SMILE conference next year. I don't know, Jason, if we can get you there. We'd love to have you. And Rob and Jay are planning on being there at this point. So hopefully you guys can meet and tell them in person. We have a question from Josh. You had a conversation internally about jeopardizing the case. Did you speak to your district attorney? They call it the Crown up there, I think, or what, I don't know. What do you call it up there? And if so, how did that conversation go?
We didn't. It was made at an executive level, right up to the chief. And really that decision more rests with him. Each province is different, but in this province, we lay charges. So I arrest somebody, I bring it to my sergeant, the desk sergeant. If he approves, we swear the information. We lay the charge here. We have a court unit that does it, but it gets forwarded to the Crown as a completed package. Unlike some jurisdictions, and I believe BC is like this, where Crown attorneys lay those charges. We simply present it, which is, I think, more common in the US. So we were able to do that without, we didn't need anyone's approval. If the chief agreed, and he would only agree if the officers involved agreed that they were prepared to have us risk that case, then we could do that in-house, and it did not go to the Crown.
All right, so I have one more question. I'm going to throw it at you, and hopefully it'll make sense. And I can't, the name is a little bit cryptic. So it says, how would you counteract one single reporter and news desk director who have taken a single use of force incident and won local awards for that one reporting and continue to make every story a throwback to the original incident and tying everything into that story from here out? We have been dealing with this issue for almost 2 years in January on a taser incident. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I don't know if I can answer it in kind of the time allotted. We have an
She has her very own CBC nagging her about an incident that happened 2 years ago on every story, I think.
I'm Rob Carver, and I'm easily reachable. If you look at the Winnipeg Police Service website, media releases, I'm more than happy to take that question and discuss it. We have a problem with the Free Press currently in terms of their slant. We've just thrown up our hands because their readership isn't that big. They're really struggling. We have gone to agencies and said, your narrative is inaccurate. We have looked at kind of going toe to toe where we would, and we haven't, but it's certainly been discussed, where we would do a press conference and specifically attempt to counter what we feel was a inaccurate piece. We kind of did that here, except nothing had been written. I can tell you that this is what I heard regarding CBC. They knew a new video was coming out that morning and they didn't care. And in-house in Winnipeg, we had heard rumors, fairly accurate, I think, that they were going to continue to do a hatchet job, that no matter what we said they were not going to be swayed. And what we heard, and this is probably true, was that we had such an impact across the country that Ian Hannah-Mansing specifically called Winnipeg and said, you can't do that. These guys have done exactly what everyone wanted. And we need to let that work because this is what we begged for. We can't disregard the truth coming out. And Toronto shut Winnipeg down. So we struggle under the radar, but we haven't had any big one where we've had to decide what to do, where it would be going toe to toe. We have looked at it. And I want to say something though. The only way you can do this, and again, I have some luxury here, is I'm a constable, Jay's a constable. We sort of report almost directly to the chief, and we have incredible support. When I write our news releases, they really aren't vetted. They're only vetted for investigative accuracy. The sergeant in charge of the investigation says, yeah, you can say that. But in terms of the politics of it, we're given massive latitude. And for this to work really well, you need PIOs you can trust, and you need PIOs who know they're trusted. Because this puts a lot of pressure on an officer to speak for a 2,000 person organization in tough political climates. So it's tricky.
You need POs you can trust, and you need PIOs who know they're trusted. That's brilliant. And so simple, right? And yeah, it's just outstanding. People are loving this presentation, Rob. As we end this call, I am kind of thinking about something with regard to George Floyd, which happened, what, a month before your incident?
Right.
How much of that was in the back of your mind when this happened? How much of your response was different because George Floyd happened a month earlier?
I think it was in the back of everyone's mind who was in a position to make the decision to go forward. It was in the back of mine. I know it was in the back of Jay's, and I know it was in the back of the executive management team here, the chief and the deputy chiefs. And again, we had a perfect storm. We had great video and officers who did exactly what their training was in a way that we could explain it if we were given the opportunity to just the common person on the street. And we took that opportunity and it worked. But I think that's rare. But we certainly knew that all of the commentary on the incident in Minneapolis was out there because there was no counterbalance counter narrative from the police early. They couldn't. I understand that. But given that we could, we took a risk and it paid off huge for us.
Outstanding. So last call for any questions. I'm perfectly happy to unmute anybody. Feel free to change your mind as I say thank you to Rob. This has just been absolutely outstanding. I feel like the next time somebody isn't going to say something about an incident that happens, the next police department, I want to send them this video and say, sit your chief down and watch this, because it's just been so excellent, and very generous of you to share your knowledge and your experience.
My pleasure.
And we still have no questions. So really great conversation. Thank you everybody who volleyed a question our way. They were all really great questions. I want to say goodbye, but also remind you that we have Poirier Ingvarsson, who is a chief inspector with Reykjavik Police from Iceland, joining us tomorrow morning to talk about something that's a little bit off the beaten path of social media, but with it's about how he implemented an e-services system in the Reykjavik Police. And he's just such a super great guy. He's been to the Smile Conference. He's been a speaker at the Smile Conference years and years ago. In fact, it was Richmond, Virginia, as I recall, is the one he came to. And then in the afternoon, we have mobile apps. What do cops need to know? Another Canadian presenter, Constable Laurie McCann, who you heard from earlier in this call with Toronto Police. So that'll be at 1 o'clock. So we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you, Rob. Excellent job. And hope to see you smile.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Allie.